decided to test me out. They put me as the last speaker on the first day after Imam Muhammad al-Asi and Imam Musa, two of the greatest exponents of the art of public speaking that I have known in my time, and I have known a few. And therefore I have a hard act to follow. I will not even try to compete with the depth of knowledge of Imam Muhammad al-Asi, his total control over the Quran, over the knowledge of the Quran and its application to modern conditions. Because this is what our Imams are lacking today. They know the Quran, they read the Quran, they recite the Quran, but they cannot apply it to the conditions today. That is where Imam Muhammad al-Asi stands head and shoulder apart, and one and only person in the world today who does it with great work, with great style, and with great commitment. Imam Abdul Ali is the man who has seen life from every possible angle. He has been on the anvil of the blacksmith. He has been on the ship of the slave trader. And he has been on the jumbo jet of the modern Islamic movement activity. This man combines in him all that is good, in all that is history, and all that is Islam. He can make us see things that you and I might look at for a lifetime and never know we have to look at it and we have to. How he has defined racialism today is something probably none of us have discussed before. We have all lived through racialism of a kind that only the people in this country know. And yet we know exactly what it is until we met Imam Abdul Ali.
Almost done. Straight.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We welcome you here today. What is this, August the 2nd, 2020. Right in the middle of what they call 2020 vision. Everybody seemed like this year they had the idea of, since good clear eyesight is 2020 vision, so they wanted to make sure that their hopes and dreams and aspirations for this year was bathed in or surrounded by 2020 vision. But last night, the night before last, I watched a movie that was made in 1995. It was called Panther. It's about Oakland and the Black Panther Party. And I knew all of well, I knew most of the leaders of the Black Panther Party. Some of the people in our organization would go back and forth between, in fact, Johnny Batilla. Can anybody pull up Johnny Batilla? Johnny Batilla, we called him Shotgun. He handled security in our organization. Later on, when I left, he did security for Felix Mitchell, who was big in Oakland when I left, but he was just a big drug dealer. He wasn't involved in no civil liberties or nothing. But Johnny Gunn, as we used to call him, went with him when I left the country. And when I saw that movie, knowing what I know about the movement, I changed my subject a little bit for today. And a lot of what we do, we're going to talk about, relates to the Oakland story. So that would not only deal with civil rights and civil liberties, but it would deal with the Islamic movement also. Because remember, originally, our first masjid is in Oakland. Then we came here 31 years ago, in '89. And we've been on a roll ever since here. Then I heard this morning early, someone from the police union standing up for police officers. And they was talking about Bill Blasey or whatever his name is, up there in New York. He had came out maybe 4 years ago when our original I Can't Breathe came out, and he said, well, we got to do more, and we got to da-da-da-da-da. Then I think somebody came out of town, so-called killed two policemen. When they killed him, then the other police blamed that on the mayor. When the mayor showed up at some event, all the police turned their back on him. And that shows you the power of the police unions. Like right now, if you go look at the news, who's got center stage? The police unions. Who's waving all the flags? The police unions. What happened to Black Lives Matter? Allah knows best. In other words, since they're unified, organized, and focused on what they do, they don't defend the people, they defend the police department. Did you find anything about Johnny Batilla? Or you couldn't, nothing came up?
I can look it. I can try to look up.
Yeah, Johnny Batilla. Okay. There are certain points about, I just mentioned some names a few minutes ago. I mentioned Hubert Harrison. He was one of the fathers of the Harlem Renaissance. But he was black, he was from the islands, he was with Marcus Garvey for some time, but nobody knew who he was because he was too black. The person that coined the phrase Black Power was Willie Ricks. He's the one that told Stokely Carmichael what to say. He was back there. Didn't that thing you dialed up said Black Power? He was the originator of Black Power. But you don't know about him. Hardly, people in the movement know about it, but other people are not aware because the press, very skillful in highlighting who they want because of ratings, because that's the kind of Negro they want. We had all the fanfare this week about John Lewis. John Lewis is a good man, but John Lewis forgave all the white people for beating him upside the head. He's a part of SNCC. But when SNCC changed with Stokely and with Kwame Ture and H. Rap Brown, Imam Jamil, to more an aggressive stance, John Lewis opposed them. And didn't the old ex-president say something about that yesterday or something at his funeral? Bill Clinton.
Yes, he did.
He said that what the man
John Lewis is Stokely Carmichael was was turning the movement in another direction, and John Lewis came back and prevailed.
He said he prevailed. Okay, John Lewis got into Congress in '86 or something like that. Why? Because the attitude of everybody in the late '60s and '70s was all related to Imam Jamil's position, right? See, remember, it had moved from civil rights, black power, black liberation, right? And finally Islam. John Lewis knew what the FBI did to them and Martin Luther King. People have been writing letters to John Lewis and trying to contact him about Imam Jamil all the time. He forgave the white folks, but he didn't forgive Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown. And they was right. The attitude that they have, that's why he couldn't have got into Congress right at the end of the 60s or the early 70s, because the people wasn't there. You know, they moved right on past. They were still in a rebellious state. So those people had to pass, or that attitude had to pass. Even in the early 80s, they was talking about how integration was a mistake. If you were to read articles, I don't know if you, because we had black stores, black shops, we had a beautiful black community. Then when integration came, see, everybody lived in the community because they was black. So the lawyers, the salespeople, the teachers, everybody lived in the black community because they was black, right? When integration came, the so-called cream of the crop, or the black people, moved out into other neighborhoods temporarily. Then they had to keep moving and follow white folks. So John Lewis forgave the white folks. Now, they've been beating him upside the head all his life. I believe they knocked all the sense out of him. Because when Obama got elected, he said, I had an out-of-body experience. I said, nigga, you had an out-of-brain experience.
He didn't even vote for Obama.
I'm sure he did. He was with Hillary.
He was with Hillary.
Yeah, he was with Hillary.
See, these Negroes make me sick, man.
Okay, but see, you gotta remember, look,
Niggas two-faced,
that's why we're having the Oakland story. That's why we're dealing with what we know and what we remember and what have you. So I'm gonna start by reading. First of all, we say, from watching that movie Panther the other day, the one that was made in '95, it was so fraught with misrepresentations. Since I'm from Oakland, I knew everybody and all. Half the people went back and forth between our organization and theirs. And they stayed with ours, you know why? Because we were blacker. And we were blacker, but not only that, we was, if the thing was to have more money and more wealth and black power, right? That's what we represented, and that's what East Oakland Enterprises did. But I want to mention a few titles, and then I'll get into the lecture. They're like La Tataraba, which means, what Yusuf said to his brothers. we're going to talk about birthright a little bit, or mention it. Birthright is that from freedom rides, civil rights, civil liberties, black nationalism, black power, black liberation, in other words, like our friends say, cool, Dinga and them. Black power, then black liberation. And then it's Islam. So Islam, we inherited, when we inherited Islam, when we became Muslims, we inherited those movements. The Islamic Party in those days, which was liberation movements. The Dar al-Islam movement, which was liberation movements. We inherited that. In the early years, in the early 80s and all that, and by the mid 80s, we were still on the road, black people in Islam. But in the early years, even the immigrant community began to invite black people to speak. In fact, they offered me that job in 1981 at first, and I refused because they asked me, well, you hang around with those Iranians, and if you could just stay away from them. I told them I became a Muslim to worship Allah, not y'all. And if Iranians tell me to stay away from you, I'm going to tell them the same thing I'm telling you now. The reason I accepted Islam was to be part of the Ummah of Rasulullah, and everybody, Indians, Pakistanis, Arabs, Iranians, Malaysians, everybody is in this club. So they got rid of me. You know how your names is in lights flashing and you're the big, pretty soon, no more Imam Musa. By 82, no more lights, no more nothing, and they go up to New York and get the Brooklyn Imam. And there he goes. He's been singing the tune ever since. And they got Mellow Yellow now. They got the whole crew that they got. Okay. But none of them was ever involved in any civil rights or civil liberties. I don't think they have ever been to jail. I was in jail every other week. Right. They don't go, that's the way it goes. Strategic depth, symptoms of empire in decline. Strategic brilliance. Strategic brilliance is something that's light and shining and it's executed very well, and you always outdo and outshine the people who are trying to oppress you. The great functional experiment, like we look at Oakland and DC as a laboratory of Islam. You can see that I always come with a lot of notes. I come with notes from notebooks. Why? Because we always said we're going to archive all of this. It's going to be like an archive. So no matter where you go, if you were to study our old As-Sabiqun, which we will have new As-Sabiquns, okay? If you were to go and, we got lectures from back in the 70s, on tape, CD, DVD, we got all that. So if you want to research the movement, you can go to our stuff. And it's kind of fixed where you can't get rid of all of it, you know. Can't get rid of all of it. Somebody stumbled into 3 or 4 DVDs. They'll have, you know how we're repetitive? Then they'll say, well, we got to get some more of that. So they'll stumble up on a couple more. And they might stumble up on the whole show. That means they will have a history of black movement, a history of Islamic movement, a functional history, and then something else. You have to remember there is nobody alive right now that made those transitions. Okay, there's nobody alive that, let's say in Oakland, Black Panther Party here, and we're right here. I mean, all right. East Oakland Enterprises was a black nationalist enterprise. Not only we own tons of businesses, but we circulated the money in the black community. And this is what Malcolm was talking about. Circulating black money in the black community, that you control what comes into your community, what goes around in your community, and when it goes out. That is the essence of black nationalism. That's what we did in Oakland. You could call anybody in Oakland and ask them, what was the heyday? They're going to give you usually a 5-year period, 68 to 70. During that period. That was the heyday of it, but it was going on before and a little bit after. But black people owned businesses. Black people needed a startup. If you had people that was managing in boxing, they could get a front where they could go get the Oakland Auditorium. And all they had to do was give back the money they put in, if they could. If not, so. True black nationalism. Now, the amount of young black people, see, before, in the old days, old gangsters controlled the black community. You had to go through the whole trend. This flipped. This was all young people. I mean, from 18 to 25, when I left the country to go to Algeria, I was 26 years old. I was still in my 20s. I was technically just getting started. After controlling the biggest organization in Northern California, and the most money, and it circulated in the community. And everybody drove Cadillacs that wanted to. People was buying their own houses. You gotta remember what this circulation of money did. If you don't believe it, just keep calling Oakland till you get somebody that, was you alive during Big Hank's time? No, but I heard about it. Well, what did you hear? Ring, what did you yes, I was there. I saw it. I was right there. Well, what happened? They're gonna tell you more than what I'm saying, because since I was leading it, I have to be modest. It's unbelievable. I'm just telling you. That's the way everybody